This is the Ford Mustang Mach-E, Ford's first all-electric SUV, inspired, of course, by the famous muscle car. Now, the headline news about this car is that it will do up to 370 miles on a full charge. That's the claimed WLTP range of this car, which is massively further than pretty much every other electric rival going. So, does that mean that this is a totally game-changing car of the year in the electric class, or is it a disappointment? We're going to find out in this video, and before we start, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and go to whatcar.com to get a great deal off your next new car. First, we'll talk you through some interesting features of the car, starting with the badge, because you'll notice that it's a black pony rather than a Ford badge. And in fact, there isn't a single Ford blue oval anywhere on this car. For some context of how big this car is and what rivals it's up against, it's roughly the same size as other electric SUV rivals like the Jaguar I-Pace, the Mercedes EQC, Audi E-tron, and also the upcoming Tesla Model Y. But the Mustang certainly has the most unconventional doors of those rivals, for whatever that's worth, because you have a button which you press, opens the door out a little bit, then you've got this tiny little grab handle to get into the front. You can also turn your smartphone into the key, but if you run out of battery and you still need to get into the car, you can put in a PIN code up here using these buttons to still get access to the car. It's a similar system getting into the back. Push this button, the door opens a little bit for you, but there's no extra handle, so you've got to put your hand into the door itself to grab it open, which just seems a bit awkward, and it's almost as if they've forgotten to put an extra handle there. Ford also says the long bonnet of the Mach-E is a nod to the design of the regular Mustang, but instead of a massive petrol engine underneath here, you've got a front trunk, and it offers 81 litres of storage, which is really good and much bigger than what you get in something like an I-Pace, which is significantly smaller at 27 litres of storage. Although you can see you've got this slightly awkward plastic partitioning, but it looks as though you can take that out if you wanted to. And there's also, funnily enough, an emergency release from the inside with a picture showing someone escaping from the boot. It's especially handy having that front trunk because the boot isn't actually that big by electric SUV standards. There is 402 litres of storage, and you can see it's bigger than what you get in a Ford Focus. There's definitely plenty of space for luggage on a family holiday, but if you compare it to an Audi E-tron, that's got 660 litres of storage. In the Mustang Mach-E, there is some underfloor space here where you can lob the charging cables. If you do want to buy a Mustang Mach-E, it won't be available through Ford's traditional dealers. Instead, it'll only be available to buy online. By the way, another bit of design taken from the regular Mustang are these so-called tri-bar rear lights. But what you really need to know about the Mustang Mach-E is that it has the longest electric range of any car on sale right now, but more on that later. It can also charge at speeds of up to 150 kilowatts, which is very impressive and means you can get a 10 to 80% charge in as little as 40 minutes, which is great for a battery this size. But unfortunately, 150 kilowatt chargers are still pretty rare. Inside the Mustang Mach-E, it has a completely different look to anything we've ever seen in a Ford before. So you have this wide dashboard that's actually got a built-in sound bar with it as well. You have a new 10.2-inch driver display, but the problem with it is the graphics look quite nice, but it's mounted to the dash, and when you move the steering wheel, depending on what position you want to have it, it might be cutting off your view of the driver display itself. So that is something that definitely isn't going to work for everyone. But you can see that the interior is centered around this absolutely massive touchscreen infotainment system that's clearly been pretty heavily inspired by what you can get in Teslas. So it's a 15.5-inch portrait layout, and the main difference between this and the Tesla system is that you have a physical control on the screen itself. So you can see this volume dial has actually been glued onto the screen down here. The only problem with it is that it feels pretty cheap. You can push it in, but it's not actually a button. It's a bit of a squeak. It doesn't feel very plush or expensive. And also, the volume isn't the most crucial thing you'd like a physical control for. So it's a shame to have that, but then still have the air conditioning controls in the touchscreen itself. But the rest of the system is impressive. It's simply laid out, has all the functions you'd need, easy to navigate through the different menus, and also it has Apple CarPlay and Android Auto as standard. And the integration is really good. It only takes up half the screen, but when the screen's this big, that really isn't a problem. And it's good because it leaves the bottom half of the screen to still display your air conditioning controls and other quick, easy shortcut menus down there as well. So that is good, definitely, compared to any other electric infotainment system out there. What about the rest of this interior? Well, the build quality feels pretty sturdy on the dashboard. Materials are hard, they aren't soft touch here, but you do have a nice fabric finish to them. You also have soft touch materials on top of the doors here, but if you look, there's quite a bit of wobble in the door card there, and also a bit of wobble on the center console too. And some of the materials down here, these plastics don't feel quite so nice as they do in other areas. The storage up front is pretty good. Under the armrest here, you have a sliding lid which reveals a storage compartment with a 12-volt socket, and also somewhere specifically where you can put the key. You've got a couple of cup holders as well as wireless phone charging and 2 USB ports at the top here. Underneath this as well, there's another storage tray, and the door bins are pretty well sized and useful as well. So here's the problem for the Mach-E. You can have a choice of 2 batteries, a smaller one and a bigger one. You also have a choice of rear-wheel drive and all-wheel drive. Now, if you go for a rear-wheel drive version with the smaller battery, then it starts at around £40,000 in the UK. For that money, this is a very good electric SUV interior. However, if you go for an all-wheel drive version with the bigger battery, then that pushes the price up to almost £60,000, and that's the car that we're in now. And for this money, you could also be looking at a BMW iX3, Audi E-tron, and all of them have plusher feeling, more premium interiors. Rear seat space in the Mustang Mach-E is actually pretty good. You've got loads of knee and leg room to stretch out in, as you can see, and there's even a good amount of space for your feet under the seat in front too. Plus, even with this optional panoramic sunroof fitted, headroom is good back here as well. So it offers a similar amount of space as other electric SUVs in the back, like the BMW iX3. Under the skin of the Mustang Mach-E, it sits on a new Ford EV platform, which is essentially a heavily reworked version of what you find underneath the Focus and the Cougar. We're in the range-topping version of it, so it gets a 99 kilowatt-hour battery, which is massive. It has 2 electric motors, one on the front axle, one on the rear axle, making it all-wheel drive with 332 brake horsepower and 429 pounds-foot of torque. This range-topping version, as we said earlier, is priced from around £60,000. So in that price range, it's up against similarly swift electric SUVs like the e-tron, which is as quick as this car, and the I-Pace, which is significantly quicker than this car. And the problem is, with this version at this price, the e-tron and the I-Pace are much better electric cars, as is an iX3. And it's the ride that is perhaps the biggest differing factor between this car and its rivals, because the e-tron, the I-Pace, they're really settled, they have nice smooth rides, but in the Mustang it's less controlled, and so it's not as comfortable. There's a lot more vertical movement in the car, certainly, and especially on these British B roads that we're on now, it just doesn't feel that suited to this car. There are times when you're on the motorway where it settles down for a bit, but it's never really that long. Ride comfort is not a strength of the Mustang Mach-E. The handling compared to an e-tron and I-Pace as well doesn't quite match up there either. It's got light steering and it's incredibly easy to manoeuvre at low speeds, but then a lot of other electric SUVs are as well. And at those higher speeds, because an I-Pace, for example, is more controlled and more measured in its movements, it just gives you more confidence to push on than you have in the Mach-E. There are a few different driving modes in the Mach-E, which you get to through the infotainment system, and you can also have a kind of corny V8 sound piped in through the speakers when you accelerate, but it doesn't really sound that convincing, and perhaps the best thing you can say about it is it's very easy to turn off. You can also have one pedal driving, so that increases the level of regenerative braking to the extent where when you lift off the accelerator, it brings the car to a complete halt. And it's really useful to have that, as it is in lots of other electric cars, because around town it means that you just hardly ever have to touch the brake pedal. It's got light steering and it's fine for manoeuvring at low speeds, no problem at all, so it's great around town. So it's pretty clear that the USP of this car is the incredible electric range that it offers. But in this range-topping version that we've tried, it's also pretty clear that the overall dynamic package doesn't quite add up to mean that it genuinely rivals other electric SUVs like the Jaguar I-Pace, the e-tron and the BMW iX3. However, if you go for a rear-wheel drive version, still with the bigger 99 kilowatt-hour battery pack, then you get what does look like much better value, because it's significantly cheaper than this range topper here. The only difference is you don't have all-wheel drive, but for most people it's probably not a necessity, and you still have an absolutely enormous electric range. So perhaps that will be the pick of the Mustang Mach-E, and that will be where it makes most sense. If you've enjoyed this video, give it a like. Make sure you're subscribed to our channel because we've got loads of other new car reviews coming out all the time. And if you're in the market for a new car, go to whatcar.com to get a great deal.